And hello once again, and this is another of these videos about a lecture topic. In this case, we're going to be looking at the semiotics of Umberto Eco. So, I am LC Lupus, and I'm doing one of these things again. Hopefully it should help to explain some of the concepts and ideas, if it is something that you are wishing to understand. So, let's dive straight into it. So, semiotics. Now, the thing is, to understand Umberto Eco's semiotic model, you should kind of be familiar with Ferdinand de Saussure's semiotic model. I did do a video about that. So if you're unfamiliar with it, I would recommend first watching my video about that, because Umberto Eco's version is a alteration of de Saussure's model. So it is based on the Saussurean semiotic model. So it's best to understand it through that lens. So I would recommend checking out that video first if you do not know, the model. But as a very, very basic thing, the Saussurean version has the whole signifier versus signified thing, where, the signifier is the signifier is the thing that you see, such as see or perceive, so an image, a word, whatever, and the signified is the meaning that is based upon that. That's like a very, very basic, extremely basic overview. There's a lot more to discuss about it, but that has its own, 30-minute video or whatever, however long that video was. So, when it comes to Umberto Eco, there are a couple of things that are good to look at first. For instance, some of these central ideas are that meanings, right, can change based on the context. The code for the meanings changes, or for meaning changes between and within context, and invention is like a major part of semiotics in terms of literature. So, these will be basically going into these over the course of the video. But these are sort of some central ideas that are good to take note of. Okay, so when it comes to Saussurean semiotics, you get the sign, right? So the sign is the thing that is made up of the signifier and the signified. So Eco instead replaces the sign with what is called the sign function, which doesn't sound like much of a change, and it's mostly because he wants to add in that function concept there, because it is made up of what are called functives, but we're going to get to that. So just think of the sign function as essentially the same as the sign. It is some kind of a meaning, right? It has it's something that has a meaning attached to it. All right. So this is a way of, as per usual, sort of separating the component parts of it. And those component parts, which are called functives, are the expression and the content functive. They're both called functives. Now, very basic level, the expression is pretty much the signifier, and the content functive is basically the signified. So remember, the signifier is the thing, and the signified is the meaning. So it's kind of similar, right? So the signifier becomes the expression. So that is the expression of the concept. So that would be a word, a phrase, an image, a something, right? It is the thing that is expressed. And then that expression has a content that is attached to it. So think of it in terms of, say, words, right? A word is stated. Let's say the word that is used often because Saussure used it too, was tree, right? So tree, which in like French is arbre, I think it's arbre, something like that, and then in say Afrikaans, it's boom. So you can see that the word, right, the actual word changes, but the signified, right, the meaning does not change. It still means the same thing. It still means a tree. The tree is the physical thing in the world, and we use different words based on different, places we are in the world, different languages, to mean the same thing. So essentially, it is the same thing, which which also signifies, in terms of the Saussurean model, that there is a arbitrary relationship between the thing that we use to represent something else and the thing that is being represented. It's an arbitrary relationship. If tree and boom both mean the same thing, then there's nothing special about the letters TR, EE versus BOOM. There's nothing that makes it special. It doesn't actually mean the thing. We've just decided that it means the thing, which means it can change. And that does happen. Words change. That just happens over time. So, cool. Now, basic similar thing here, right? The expression is whatever it is, so that could be the word, right? An expression is those same things. It could be, tree versus boom, arbor. It's the same as the signifier. And then the content is what it means. But the thing about this is that it's essentially supposed to be more flexible. Okay? We're going back to that central ideas thing at the top of the episode, where we said that meanings can change based on context. That is what Eco wants to do with his model, with the sign function over the sign. In terms of the Saussurean semiotics, it's much more rigid. A sign is made up of a signifier and a signified. It is a relationship that they are connected to each other. Whereas Eco says that no, the signifier and the signified, which are now the expression and the content, can actually become disconnected from each other. There can be multiple expressions to mean the same content, or a single expression can have different content attached to it. So think about, like, say, tree, right? Tree, we know what it means. Tree, boom, arbor, it means the same thing. However, tree can also actually mean different things within different contexts. Let's say a poem. We're going to take a poem, and the poem uses the images of factories and smog and environmental destruction and devastation, right? Think of, like, say, WALL-E, okay, right? The Pixar movie. Everything is destroyed. The world is full of just garbage, and it's terrible. And then there's a single plant, or in this case, a single tree. That single tree it's not just a tree. It actually represents something. It represents a different content. Yes, sure, it's a tree. So if it was a book you're reading instead of a movie, and it would just say, oh, it's a tree, it now becomes something different. It isn't just a tree. It becomes a representation of hope. It becomes a possibility of the future. It has changed its content. So that is something that's quite interesting, right? The context changes, and therefore it changes. We could also have something like, say, something that is in the exact opposite mode, right? So say there is a natural landscape, right? And then this story is telling about how humans first settled on this natural landscape, and then they started cutting down the trees and building a town. Now, all of a sudden, the tree, which before represented, hope and whatever, now represents the possibility for progress, right? It can change its meaning based on the context in which it is situated, which also means that the relationship between the expression and the content, or, between signifier and signified, is correlational. It is not causal. There isn't a causal one-to-one relationship between the two, because it can be disconnected, it can be changed, it can be altered to become something else. Now, also something that, many people use de Saussure's theories disconnected from what he really thought, because de Saussure was a linguist. He wasn't really thinking of non-linguistic things. For instance, he wasn't really thinking about literature. He was thinking about pure linguistics, language, the use in language. It was other theorists who were like, let's use this in literature. He didn't, right? So his model was much more based on its use in its sort of functional use within ordinary communication, within people talking to each other, within linguistic means. People like Eco have been like, no, let's reapply it in a different way, and also let's adapt it so that it's better suited to a literary mode. So that's sort of what happens. So the expression signifier, or expression functive, is then linked to multiple possible content functives. Right? That expression can have a lot of different contents or possible contents, which makes it quite an interesting thing, right? Because it can now become variable, which is one of the major sort of points that differentiates Eco's model from Saussure's model. They're still very similar. So, for instance, if you are going to write an essay in which you are comparing the two together, or in which you're just talking about the one, this one, you need to compare Eco to Saussure. You can't not do that comparison. It does not work if you don't do that comparison, because that comparison is very important. It is built upon Saussure's theories, so it has to. So you need to talk about how, listen, Saussurean semiotics was very focused on linguistics, but we've moved beyond the need for just linguistics, even though it is, semiotics is actually called structural linguistics, so it is a form of linguistics, but it has been adapted to be much, much further along. And I'm actually going to also do a video in which I do talk about some of the other areas in which it has been moved along, such as biosemiotics, which sort of applies semiotics to biological things. So it compares it to, connects it rather, connects it to the way that biological sort of aspects of the world have their own kind of meaning attached to them. So, animals and plants and stuff like that, free of human control, sort of a way of putting a sense of meaning into something that is not human, which, but that's a whole other thing. So, the expression functive and the content functive together lead to a sign function, right? And that is the sign. It's exactly sort of the same as the Saussurean model, but we can see now why he uses the word function, because it is made up of these functives. It's supposed to be much more variable, and it's much more arbitrary, even more arbitrary than what Saussure had sort of expressed in his own work. So that makes it quite different, but also quite similar. So another thing that's also a little bit irritating is you can kind of see the expression functive as being both signifier and signified, and content being something new. But that can make it also a little bit confusing for a lot of people to understand. So it is easier to kind of see it as a signifier-signified replacement, even though it could be argued that it isn't really, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. But for the purposes of this, you don't need to go that sort of in-depth into it. Okay, so this model, right, can then be used to explain how like a single idea, image, word, whatever, can have a lot of meanings attached to it. So remember, as I said, tree, boom, arbor, whatever, but when they're within a literary context, it could, the exact same image, the exact same word, the exact same thing can mean something different based on where it is used, how it is used, etc. So that makes it quite an interesting and unique thing, right? If it can be so variable, it can change based on where it is. So a good example that brings up is like puns. Puns are literally a double meaning. That's what a pun is. So it's not even that one thing can mean something in one context and it can mean something else in a different context. A word can mean two things in the same context, right? So, puns exist all over the place, and I'm terrible at thinking of a pun at, in the moment, but there's one for some reason that I always remember because it's from a movie that is not a good movie, but I just always, remember it. So, let's just say this is like a thing. There's some eggs, right? Chicken eggs are that some people eat. Not everybody eats chicken eggs. So, say, some eggs. if you walk up to some eggs, right, and let's say there's something about it that's different. So there's not very many eggs there. Let's just say there's a shortage of eggs, which actually a while back in South Africa there was a bit of an egg shortage. I think. I don't eat eggs, so I don't really know, but I'd heard about it from someone. So I could be completely wrong, but I think that happened. So imagine you go up to where the eggs are, and there's only some eggs. And you're like, oh, that's weird. And then someone says, yeah, I bet you didn't expect there to be so few eggs. That's a pun. Right, it's silly, but it's cute. But you are simultaneously using the word egg to refer to eggs, but also as a stand-in for expect. So it is simultaneously the same word is being used in two different meanings within the same context. And Saussure and semiotics doesn't really have a way to explain that kind of thing. So you can see that as the codes are being used to create a new understanding or interpretation of a sign function, right? It is correlational, as I said before. This isn't a one-to-one relationship. If you were to use that same pun in a situation in which eggs were not part of it, imagine if we were just like out somewhere and we were looking at, clothes in a clothing store, and then someone said, I didn't expect that to happen. You just think that they misspoke because it has nothing to do with the situation. Like, okay, you used like a pun, but it makes no sense in the situation. So it's just a stupid pun. Like it's dumb. It doesn't have a point here. It's not being clever. You're just sounding words that sound similar, but it doesn't actually make sense within context. So the codes of, literature and language in general, I remember codes are sort of all of the different things that contribute to meaning. They all come together, right? So the context comes together. So let's say that egg example, let's say if that's in a story. The fact that the characters came together, the fact that the characters are all speaking together, they have a friendly context with each other, they have a friendly relationship, there is the situation, and then it sort of happens. So the codes all come together to help the interpretation and understanding of the sign function in that particular situation. So, funzy. So that's the second of those major central ideas. We've said meanings can change based on context. Cool, we've spoken about that a couple times. Now the code for meaning changes between and within context. So it can change inside the same context or in between contexts. So meaning changes sort of all the time based on a variety of factors. Now, lastly, the sign functions, especially in literary texts, are marked by invention. So this means that new meanings are produced, and these new meanings, these creations, can be minimal, moderate, or radical. So the sign function, as it says here, especially in literary texts, that's why the last of the central ideas is that invention becomes a major aspect of semiotics in literature. It's not confined to literature, but literature does it more often than the others in many ways. So that's why we focus on the literary aspect in this particular case, right? So words can be created, or ideas can be created that are based on old words. Let's just say whenever a writer in a book creates an idea, creates some, concept that is not in other contexts, but you can understand the words together, but they've been turned into something new. So this could be an entirely new word, which would make it quite radical, or it could be like a less so, which would be moderate or minimal, somewhere around there. So take, for instance, something like George Orwell's 1984. In that book, there is a type of language that is developed called Newspeak. Now, Newspeak is now a newly created sign function. It becomes a new concept in and of itself, but it's based on it's also quite a radical concept, but it's using words that already exist, right? New meaning something that's new, and then speak meaning something that is spoken. So it's a new kind of language. So in terms of the word, it's quite like a minimal or moderate sort of invention. It's not really, it's not like creating a brand new word and being like, oh, this means something. Whereas the concepts within it are quite radical, and it has its own, it becomes its own language. Whereas, let's say if I were to just be like, another language in another thing, like say Tolkien, Sindarin, I think it's called Sindarin. I love Lord of the Rings, but I'm not enough of a Lord of the Rings fan to know the names of the language. But I think that's how it's one of the Elfish languages. There, it is based on other languages, but it is quite unique in and of itself. So it becomes something more radical, a more radical kind of invention. So the word itself, I mean. So this is how invention can occur. You can create new meanings, like new things can be made up. Can be invented within language, and especially within literature, because literature provides us a way for instance, writers who are creating other kinds of things, like, say, science fiction worlds, can make up new ideas that do not exist in the real world. So, as a matter of fact, because I'm going to plug it later anyway, so I mentioned here in my own book that's coming out, or that has come out, actually, in that book, it is set in a cyberpunk world, so it's sort of like sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, not fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian, terrible, everything's horrible. And then there are terms like flesh zone and cyber zone and other things like cloud self. And these are terms that I made up, but they are standard words within that world because it's a different world. It's not our world, it's a made-up world. But if people were to then use those terms in the real world, they would become words within the real world. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. Like, say, with George Orwell's 1984, people do use the term newspeak. Usually they use it incorrectly because they don't actually understand 1984 at all, but they use the term. So that is the last of the central ideas of Umberto Eco's semiotic model. And I'd say that's pretty much the end of that. I've already basically mentioned my own book within the video, but if you liked some of the idea of those things I mentioned, you could always check out Flesh Zone Blues, which is a cyberpunk, dystopian, terrible, everything is horrible in the world novel. It is on Amazon and it's in the description below. So if you want to check it out, you can do that. Otherwise, please, you can like the video, which would always be useful. Leave a comment. You can ask questions. You can always ask questions because I do respond to people that have questions about the material and stuff. And if it's something more substantive, or if you have a specific area that you want to learn more about, you can always comment about that and say, listen, I'm struggling with understanding this concept, and I might be able to make a video about that if I know it. Especially if it's something literary. Like, I do know, that's why I make these videos. I know literary stuff quite well, so I can help with that. You can also share the video. This can be quite helpful for anyone who is doing, literature and literary theory, literary analysis, and of course semiotics in general, say at university level. This could help you to understand those concepts. So, with that, pretty much done. So if you can do all those things, like, comment, subscribe. Subscribing is also very lovely. And otherwise, hope you have a great day, week, and month ahead, and goodbye.